Good morning. As he said, Peter Miller, Minnesota. What I'm talking about today is going to be kind of training considerations for people to be successful in more than one throwing event. I think at any level, this is an important conversation. I think the higher level you get, it gets to be more and more challenging. And so I took a couple examples of kids that I've coached that competed either at the Big Ten or NCAA level in multiple events and what I did to get them there. And then I'm also just going to kind of look at a general outline of how I set up my training, how I set up my practice schedule, just to give you guys an idea of what I do. So a little bit of my background, he talked about that. I was an athlete at Minnesota. A couple other Minnesota alum are here, which is good. I started coaching Division III at UW River Falls. Walked into a program that had just won a national championship. Had some good throwers there, and was coached by another former Gopher prior to me, so it was an easy transition. Loved that. As I went there, I took over more responsibility, other events, strength and conditioning, that kind of stuff. And then in September of 2011, I was hired at North Dakota, which was transitioning from Division II to Division I. And so some unique challenges with that. Being in Grand Forks is a challenge in and of itself. But had success there, coached both genders there, really liked that, liked my boss, liked who I worked with. But Minnesota was home. Both my parents graduated from the university. I went to the university, I threw there. And so as soon as that job opened up, I applied and was lucky enough to convince my boss to hire me, even though I probably wasn't ready for it. At that point, I coached women's throws. And then my second year, I added the high jump. And then last August, our AD called a meeting and combined our programs, and so I added men's throws, got rid of the high jump. I still work with the multis. The other thing on this slide that I think is super important, and you guys are here, so I think you think it's important, is just continuing education. I think you can't talk about that enough. And so I've tried to do everything I possibly can to learn about this sport and to change things I'm doing to see if they work, and so that's just kind of an outline of what I've done education-wise. Just as a disclaimer here, I'm still learning, I'm still changing. I make mistakes all the time, but I'm trying to figure out how to help each kid, and taking over the men has been a huge challenge for me. Just rethinking how I do things, trying to figure out what implement range works for men, all that kind of stuff. I spent a bunch of money and time at convention last year taking coaches out to coffee or lunch or whatever, trying to pick their brain about how to be successful with men's programs. And so we had a good first year, but I'm still learning there. Most of my experience with that is with women. And so two of the examples I give are women's throwers, but I do think there's obviously a ton of translation between the genders. This stuff isn't going to work for everybody, but it seems to work at Minnesota. I think all of our I was sitting talking to the Air Force throws coach and the Baylor throws coach yesterday about what their jobs are. And like, my job is so different than their job. So what I do might not work perfectly at Baylor, might not work perfectly at Air Force, but it seems to work pretty well at Minnesota. And so you guys can take this with a grain of salt that where you're at, you're gonna have different facility challenges, different weather challenges, different academic challenges. But this is what I'm doing. It's exactly what I'm doing. So. It's pretty broad strokes. It's not super detailed. If you want more details, I'm happy to talk to people. And one thing I have to say, and I know this varies everywhere, is I don't write my own strength training. We are triphasic at Minnesota, so that's what we do. I don't always agree with that, but I've kind of learned to adapt to that. And so that's a consideration in everything I do is what we're doing in the weight room and how to, I don't know, manage that, but work with that to be successful. So just some of the success we've had. We're a very conference-driven team, and so having kids that do more than one event is super important. And so just some stats there about Big Ten scoring and NCAA first-round qualification. Here's kind of our expectations and our program goals, because that obviously plays a role into what I do. And so we are a conference-driven team. The Big Ten meet is all that matters. If I ever tell my boss that I'm thinking about the NCAA meet, I get yelled at, because the NCAA meet is just a bonus. Everything we do is to set our kids up to be successful at the conference level. Obviously in the Big Ten nowadays, if you're successful at the conference level, you'll probably be at least at the NCAA meet. But it is a different challenge to kind of keep kids in more events to try and score more conference points versus trying to focus on one event or two events to make an NCAA impact right away. So we are the only Division I in the state for now. There's a D3 school trying to transfer to Division I. We'll see if that happens. But that does allow us, like recruiting-wise, to do some things that some other schools can't do. And we also have reciprocity with Wisconsin, North Dakota, and South Dakota, and Manitoba. So we have a huge kind of in-state population. We're able to recruit kids and bring them to school cheaply from a lot of places. So, and then our roster is large. I have 20 throwers right now. I have a 21st coming in January, and then I have a couple post-collegiates that I work with too. And so scheduling practice, all that kind of stuff, managing that big of a group is a challenge, but we're a conference-driven team. We have 70 plus women, which is actually down from when I started, we had 98 women on the roster. I think we have 71 now. So our roster's gotten a lot smaller, but throws-wise, when we combined, the men had a big group and I had a big group, and so then I had a huge group. But I do have 7 seniors this year, and so it's gonna kind of start to balance itself out. So process, I think this is not unique. I think this speaks to any presentation could have a slide like this, but this is just kind of how I view things, what I try to focus on, what I think has made Minnesota a successful program. I don't think there's any secrets. I think what I'm gonna share with you guys today, a lot of you probably already do, but it's what I do. It's worked at Minnesota. It's different than what I did at North Dakota. It's different than what I did at River Falls, but I'm learning every year how to manage all the challenges at Minnesota and how to use all the resources, because we do have a ton of resources. Take notes. I talked about this 2 years ago. I give all my kids one of these. This is our training journal. In it has our general strength circuits, our warm-ups, goal sheets, a ton of different stuff. It's changed every year. But I use one of these too, and I take notes every day at practice. Not about every kid every day, but every week I have a couple notes about each kid, trying to figure out what cues work for them, what drills work for them, what definitely doesn't work for each kid. And so I think having something like this is super important. Obviously not every school can afford to give every kid one of these, but just have a notebook and keep track. I had one in college that was just a college ruled notebook, and I still have it today from my notes every practice I had in college. So hard work, I think goes without saying, but that's up to us as coaches just as much as it is the athletes. If we're not willing to watch every throw, if we're not willing to go in on Sunday and write training and do that kind of stuff, like how can we expect them to go in on Sunday to do recovery and all that stuff? And then be willing to change. I do make mistakes all the time. I do have to adapt to different athletes from different backgrounds. We started recruiting internationally, and so there's a huge amount of give and take, I think, with some international athletes that I don't have to have as much with local kids who have never thrown the hammer before or whatever. Throw as much as possible. At Division I, we have the safety exception. I know D2 and D3 each have different rules about when you can practice, but my practice schedule from September 8th or whatever, the second Monday of the school year until the week of finals pretty much stays the same, which makes the time management stuff super easy if you guys have to deal with that. But basically I just put on there Tuesday and Thursday until we start our 20 hours is totally voluntary. But the kids know we have a big group. We have a super competitive group. If you're not there, you're not gonna get better. You're not gonna travel, but it is voluntary. Consistent quality instruction. I watch almost every practice. I hate recruiting for that reason. I hate being gone. I've been uncomfortable this week because I have a volunteer for the first time and he's back home watching practice. It makes me uncomfortable that I don't get there, but he has been sending me videos every day, so I have still kind of been there. Video review is the next thing on here. We don't do a ton of video review in practice. Now that I have a volunteer, we've done a little bit more, but outside of practice, this year I went every Wednesday. I had 30-minute meetings with half my group, so every 2 weeks I met with every kid in my group to talk about life, talk about school, and then to watch video. I think that's super important. But I think the biggest thing is to watch competitive reps. Watching training videos is one thing, but when your name's actually called in a meet and you have to perform, that's like when you really see what you're doing wrong. So I think film review of competitive reps is the most important thing. So everyone should vote that we can do that in whatever the session that we have this afternoon. Special strength, I think, is something that I've learned more and more about over the last few years, and we've incorporated a ton. I do it last every day, even after the weight room, but I do still coach it. I sit there, if people are doing plate twists and their arms are short, I yell at them. If the orbit of the plate is wrong, I yell at them. If they're not striking the med ball correctly for a shot drill, I don't really yell at them, but I do correct them all the time. I used this quote the last time I presented. I think it's in our training journal. It's the background of my work computer. It's something to me that's really simple. It just basically says like persistence will solve all the world's problems. There's a lot of smart people, a lot of educated people that are doing nothing, but people that shouldn't be successful are super successful if they want to be, and they're willing to put in the work. So next, I'll just kind of go through how I set up training before I go into the examples. So this is my weekly practice schedule. I am, organized. So everything is color-coded. Everything has the time limits on it. So this is kind of how I handle like my time management plan too. As you can see, it's a lot. I spend a lot of time at the circle. I would much rather be there than my office. But for each individual, there's up to 7, maybe 8 for a 3-event kid, technical sessions each week. At least one of those sessions is not full throws, it's all drill based. 2 to 3 implements per session. If we're throwing the hammer and the weight, we might get to 4 or 5, but usually 3 is kind of where I limit it. 2, 3, or 4 lifts per week, depending on the time of year. Summer we do more. In season it's 1 or 2. During the fall it's 3, but the middle lift is pretty short and more of a trying to get some recovery out of it. We do plyos. I do a lot of plyos at the track. If you know triphasic training, that has plyos in it too, and so it's been a challenge to kind of balance that out over the last couple of years. But those kind of go from low level like ankle flips in the fall as we're trying to build volume up to like max effort hurdle hops and stuff in the spring. Some of that stuff I do as part of the warm up as like a nervous system set, just like you see shot putters doing overhead backs. I'll do 3 sets of 3 hurdle hops to kind of limit contacts but wake the nervous system up before a throwing session. But then at the end of the year, we're doing heavy bounds. We're doing like max effort stuff because we do want our nervous system set up to do that. And then special strength almost every day. And that varies. We'll talk more about that by event, by time of year. Sometimes it's a circuit-based thing. Sometimes it's max effort stuff. It's kind of dependent on the time of year. Next is just the daily practice setup. So I write 21 programs every week, soon to be 22. So I have a Excel file that just has tabs at the bottom with every kid's name. That's how I send it out each week. So this is a freshman girls program. It has her implements at the top, what warm-up she's supposed to do depending on if she lifts first or has practice first. There's a couple warm-ups on some of there. What days she lifts, what event it is, what our kind of training plan for that event is going to be, and then what her special strength conditioning is going to be. And then at the end is a cool-down activity. I would say 90% of the time my kids don't do that, but I put it on there just because I do think there's importance to kind of shutting your system down at the end of practice too. Just looking at it, general warm-up followed by a specific warm-up, whether that's turns for the hammer or some med ball drills for the shot. Sometimes then we'd put the plyos or the overhead backs to kind of set the nervous system up there. A session is in the jav, a full throw day is 12 throws at the most. In the discus, we might get up to 60. I like 120 throws a week is kind of the volume that I'm looking for in every event, except the javelin. And so the way it kind of works, hammer, we do 5 days where we take about 24 throws. Shot, we do 4 days where we take about 30 throws. Discus, we do 2 days where we take about 60 throws. So all those add up to 120. So that's kind of the volume I'm looking for. Discus, obviously, if you're a discus-only kid, we'll get more than that, but I'm not talking about discus-only kids. After practice, do plyometrics, sprinting, lifting. We do something explosive every day. I'm not one of those guys that has like neural day this day and then a non-neural day the next day. We do Tuesdays. Our lift on Monday is hard. Our lift on Friday is hard. So Tuesday and Saturday are more drill-based days, but we're still trying to do something heavy and explosive, and so you could still call those kind of neural days. And then special strength after that, almost every day for anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes, depending on what we're trying to accomplish. So going into kind of the topic now, so considerations for throwing multiple events. This is just kind of general things that I look at for each athlete and for the team. And when I'm setting up an annual plan, when I'm setting up expectations for a freshman, that kind of stuff. These are the things I'm thinking about before I start to get kind of detail oriented. So coming out of high school, coming in from an international place, what's their primary event? Are they able to do a secondary event at our level? Do I want to try them in the hammer, that kind of stuff? I put a question on there, and it's for you guys to think about, are there true two-event throwers? Obviously, I think you could look at Maggie Ewan, you can look at, I forget the kid that threw at Virginia. Obviously, people that have won NCAA titles in more than one event are true two-event throwers. I don't think we get those kids super often, but they do exist. And so how do you handle that versus somebody who's a really good shot putter and throws the discus pretty far, or vice versa? So what's our team goal? What's our roster consideration? My men's roster is a lot smaller than my women's, so multi-event kids, and I think that's probably true across this room. So multi-event kids on the men's side are much easier or much more important than on the women's side. You can get away with, I have 4 open javelin throwers on the women's side. I have no javelin throwers on the men's side because it's hard to put a roster spot to a one-event outdoor kid. So thinking about that, when and where can they help the team? Will they develop in year 1 in the shot? Will it take 3 years to get them in the discus? That kind of stuff, I think about that. What's the long-term plan? What's our vision for the team? My boss is very forward-thinking, and so we have our scholarship list all the way out to 23, 24. We have our depth chart all the way out to 23, 24. We know when we're hosting Big Tens, where Big Tens is, all that kind of stuff. And so we're trying to think about that with every kid we recruit. How are they going to help us in years 4 and 5? How are they going to help our team vision for 22 when we host the Big Ten meet? And so having a long-term plan beyond just an annual plan. Time of year, like when does the weight come in versus the hammer? How long do you hang on to the discus during the indoor season? Do you have a place to throw those events? Can you do hammer throws in January or not? We have great facilities, so we're able to do that. What is the weight room going to look like? Obviously, a shot putter needs to bench press. A hammer thrower probably needs to bench press for some balance, but really shouldn't care about the bench press, in my opinion. We can talk about that later if you want. Training age, I think, is a super important thing with high school kids. I have a Greek kid coming in January. He's thrown the hammer for 5 years. I have 3 freshmen who've thrown the hammer for 15 weeks. Obviously, how much volume they can handle, what intensity their body actually goes through when they're taking a throw versus what his body's going to go through taking a throw is very different. And so how do you handle their training age? How do you try to play catch up on some of that stuff? Even at the highest level, I have an American hammer thrower that threw 68 meters last year in his 3rd year throwing the hammer. I have a Norwegian who threw 67 meters. The Norwegian has been doing it for 10 years. He's got literally 3 times as many reps. So how do I write training for him versus the American kid? I think training age plays a huge role in that. And then potential, do some testing, look at limb length, look at height, understand what's advantageous for each event, and kind of take that into consideration as you go on to writing your plan. Now I'm going to go into a couple examples, and then I'll talk more about why I made the decisions that I made with these kids. So the first example is Agnes Esser. She was a Canadian, very high-level discus thrower. This is kind of her background. So I put Canadian on there because there are expectations. She had competed internationally for Canada prior to coming to Minnesota. She was in Eugene at the World Junior meet. She made the top 12. She didn't make the top 8 or whatever on that day. But that came with some expectations. She had thrown the shot pretty far, competed at the Pan Am Junior meet in the shot. And so her kind of expectations was something I took into consideration because part of her coming to Minnesota was to get her ready for summer international meets and stuff. Young training age, even though she was international and had success, she didn't start throwing until she was a junior in high school. She threw 2 years of high school, then took a gap year, and then came to Minnesota. So how we were going to handle that was something I considered. Minimal hammer background. She had thrown the 3K one time as a junior in high school, 38 meters. She had done turns, but had not competed with the 4K at all when she came to Minnesota. Again, World U20 finalist, a 14.2 meter PR in the shot, which at 18 with only 3 years of training is a pretty high level mark. And so that was obviously something we wanted to grow, and that's part of why she was a full ride kid at Minnesota. So things we considered when putting her training plan together: her body type. She's really tall, long arms, extremely athletic. Her vertical when she came in was 27 point something. She left, the best she ever tested I think was 32.3, which for a 6'1" female is truly world class. That's why she's throwing as far as she's still throwing. The background of international success, international potential. What was she? She had had success in the disc, but never competed in the hammer. Wasn't built like a traditional shot putter. So what kind of potential did she have? What were our team needs? At that point, I had not had a shot putter score in the Big Ten. Our hammer group was good, but we felt like that was maybe going to be her best event. And then we needed a big-time discus thrower. I had a 54-meter girl on the roster, but she was a fifth year at that time. And so we needed somebody to come in and kind of take her place. And then one thing that I ended up considering down the line with Agnes is she had her dad got diagnosed with brain cancer summer after her freshman year and passed away actually right after the Big Ten meet her sophomore year. And so for the rest of her career, that kind of her dad's birthday, her brother's birthday, the anniversary of that was something that I took into consideration when writing training plans those time of year, because I think that kind of stuff beyond the physical side, that played a huge role on what she could do on those days and that kind of stuff. So this is a video of Agnes's PR in the discus, collegiate PR, 57.98 at Long Beach State. She threw 57.91 her sophomore year. Junior year was very challenging because going through all that stuff. And then came back her senior year, had a great senior year, made the national meet, threw really well in the pouring rain at the national meet, just missed the final there. But this was, she had a great weekend. Her hammer PR was a day earlier too, so we'll watch that. So this is kind of Agnes's evolution, taking into consideration everything I knew when she was a freshman and then trying to progress from there. So discus was primary her freshman year, hammer was secondary, we threw almost no weight, shot was tertiary. We did it mostly because she ended up having success in January without really doing it. So we tried to I almost cut her from the hammer. I'm glad I didn't. But the discus went 54.38. Her PR was 51.60 coming in. So some good progress there. Shots, she threw 15.21, which was huge. And then the weight, like I said, we did almost nothing. She lucked into a really far hammer throw. I think her best throw going into it was at Iowa, going into that meet, was maybe 50 meters 40. She threw 58.40, looked at me when she did it and had no idea what she had just done. She went like this to me, which was funny, but that's totally Agnes. Ended up making the region meet with that and replicated through 56 at the region, so she had made progress. But for a first-year hammer thrower, I've never had anybody throw anywhere close to that. I probably never will again. But ended up obviously changing our mindset a little bit. The next year was kind of the same focus. But that's when she started. Her dad had been diagnosed in the summer. She went home for 2 weeks during the indoor season because we thought he was going to pass. He ended up making kind of a miraculous recovery. Got to spend some time with him, came back. The weight had gone well prior to that, but then she went home for a couple weeks. Ended up only throwing the weight at the Big Ten meet and being 13th or something. But then outdoors, very up and down season. A lot of PRs, a lot of 54 high, a lot of big fouls out the sector line in the disc. The hammer was chipping along really nice. And then at the Big Ten meet, she threw 61 meters in the hammer. She threw 55 in the disc to be fourth. But the day in between those 2 days is when she had found out her dad was kind of taking a turn for the worst again. So she actually flew home from the Big Ten meet and then flew back to the region meet and set that mark at the region meet, which was a cool kind of moment. The shot did not go anywhere, so we didn't throw it at the conference meet and kind of got rid of it. Went into year 3, knew that there were some expectations in the discus kind of because of the emotional stuff. Her dad was German, had been a discus thrower growing up. So we kind of changed her focus to the hammer, moved the discus to secondary, made the weight a little bit more of a focus because she had some success. She ended up Big Ten runner-up, I think 18th nationally, just missed the national meet. Hammer progressed a little bit. Discus didn't progress, but it was honestly a good year. She competed well at the right times, considering everything she had been through. Year 4, grew up, had managed that, had gotten home for the summer, had competed internationally, gained experience, kind of changed her mindset a little bit. And year 4 was great, 21.67 in the weight. She was third at the Big Ten meet, throwing 21.67, which was abusive. 63.60 in the hammer. She was third there at the Big Ten meet too, throwing 62 something. 57.98 in the disc. I think she actually didn't make the final at the Big Ten meet, threw 51.90 and didn't make the final, which is also craziness. But then went on to make the national meet, which was good. And then she's continuing to throw in Canada right now. She threw 58.92, dropped the hammer, ended up having a hip surgery. But right now I think is 34th on the world rankings or something. So hopefully has another good year and has a chance to make Tokyo for Canada. So just kind of looking back, this is how I set up Agnes's long-term training plan. The hammer, because I felt like we had to play catch up and I felt like anatomically speaking, that might be her best event. We spent a lot of time on that all year. or every year, 3 to 4 days a week. And then the discus was her next event, so we did more discus throwing than most people do, even all year round. Even the week of the Big Ten indoor meet, we were still touching the discus with her. And then at the beginning of the year, or beginning of her career, we did 2 days a shot, but that got removed from the program, like I said, kind of April of her second year. Hammer from scratch, so we had to start totally, like, this is how you hold it, this is how you turn. Did what Colin talked about in his presentation, basically. And then for her, she had such a limited background in sports in general. She'd played a little bit of basketball, but she grew up on the middle of nowhere, didn't have like running water, like had an outdoor bathroom and stuff growing up, so very unique background. So her kind of coordination and overall general strength and specific strength was very low, and so a ton of time doing that. And she was a great athlete already, like the vertical jump was great, and so we didn't do a ton of that. But then with the discus, I think it can get monotonous, so we did a lot of implement variety. We used mini hammers, we used like the handled med balls, we used weighted balls up to 3 kilograms. We did some goofy stuff, but tried to keep it interesting. And she loved to throw, so she was willing to do kind of whatever. With her, we had to develop feel. Like I said, she's a great athlete, but didn't understand throwing, didn't feel things great. I think maybe a little too explosive for her late developments, and she got into throwing late, and so tried to develop feel, do a lot of slow things, do a lot of long things to kind of make her feel different positions. Worked on mobility a bunch, separation a bunch, because she had long arms, but she was also kind of tight with both arms, and so tried to kind of let those things relax, and then adapted throughout for the emotional stress of her family stuff. So, and then this is her hammer PR. She had PR'd the day before at Mount Sac, and actually had a pretty rough day, barely got in the final at this meet, and then on her last throw just kind of said, whatever, I'll go for it, and that was 63-62, which I think was third on our team that day, so it was a pretty good day for our hammer group. And then this is how I set up her weekly training. One thing I found through this summer with Agnes, she made a couple international meets, and I found when she focused on one event, like repetitively, she learned a lot better than if she did like hammer Monday, disc Tuesday, hammer Wednesday, disc Thursday. And so we set up her week to kind of do 3 days of hammer, 3 days of disc, like back to back to back. And that, her senior year made a ton of progress doing that. And so that's something with her that I found to be, I found it to be different. I haven't had a ton of athletes that are successful that way, because sometimes you take 3 days off, you might totally forget how to throw. But with her, it worked to do 3 discus days or 3 hammer days. She would remember what she was doing the next day and build off of it and be able to come back better than if we alternated days. So Monday was hammer in the morning, discus in the afternoon, and then lifting right after discus. I have found to separate hammer and disc works better with the kids I've had that do those events, not to go like I think shot disc, you can have back-to-back sessions and they translate, but I think the hammer and the disc, because of the knee positions, because of the width and that kind of stuff, I found it more challenging to do those back-to-back. And so we separated her practices, so she would do hammer in the morning, have some class, come back in the afternoon, throw some disc, and then lift right after that. Tuesday was discus in the afternoon, followed by some work. Wednesday was discus in the morning, and then a light, fast lift, and start to kind of feel the hammer after that, do some hammer-specific strength. Thursday was a 2-a-day of hammer, so we did full throws in the morning, followed by some weight throw and some drill stuff in the afternoon, and then followed by some pretty heavy special strength to kind of feel the weight. Friday was hammer full throws again, and then our hardest lift of the week. And then Saturday we varied it depending on what time of year it was, what we were focusing on. So she did a little bit of hammer or a little bit of disc at that point. And then we always on Saturday tried to do some like recovery circuit type stuff to kind of feel better on Monday than we would feel if we didn't, because our Friday lifts we try to make very challenging. And then special strength was almost every day in small doses, and again at the end. So this is her weight throw PR, 21.67. This was at our home meet, and then the next week I think she threw 21.61 or something at the Big Ten meet to be third. So, but pretty good weight throw for somebody who had never done anything like that in high school. So the next person I'm going to talk about is John Theraldson, who I took over John's training a year and 4 months ago. John came from North Dakota. Extremely athletic guy. He had a scholarship offer to NDSU to play wide receiver out of high school. He showed up at Minnesota like at 205 pounds, but had glided 63 feet and had stumbled through the discus circle at like 174 feet. His first year, he was coached by Lyndon Rader, and then Lyndon retired, started his company that summer. And so then Matt Conley came in and worked with John for 2 years, did a great job developing John's confidence back and his technique. And then I took over. Matt and Lyndon made me look pretty smart because John was ready to have a really big year. And he did that. So he is a freak show. He just set our pentathlon. I don't know if you guys do that, overhead back, standing long jump, standing triple jump, between legs forward, 30-meter excel. We do that testing on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving every year. John scored 393 points in that, which is really, really good. And probably would have scored more, but I only let him take one standing triple jump because he's got some knee history stuff. So prior to working with me, he had thrown 1854 in the shot and 5228 in the disc, but had a really weird way of getting there. His freshman year, he threw 1731, his true freshman year when he redshirted with Lyndon, and then some issues arose. His knee acted up his second year, and he ended up throwing, I have it on the next slide, I don't remember exactly, I'll get to that. But young rotational training age. There is, if you follow John on social media, he posted some videos of him trying to rotate as a freshman in high school, which is hilarious. But other than that, he glided all the way through and learned to rotate in college. Having to deal with a third collegiate coach, I think, is a challenge. And then learning to compete. John, like I said, his big meet history is very fluctuated, and so we'll talk about that as we go. So things I considered with John, his body type, he's 6'4", he's got like a 6'8" wingspan, 40-inch vertical, 20-meter overhead back, almost 11-foot standing long jump. The guy is an absolute monster. He should play in the NFL if he wants to. But he's also very tight, and so kind of his technique is interesting. His background of kind of building in the rotational shot, building confidence. I asked him if I could share this. His first Big Ten indoor meet, he fouled his first throw. On his second throw, the shot fell out of his neck and fell on the toe board. And his third throw, he threw 1470 or something like that, and he had thrown 1730 coming into the meet. And then by the outdoor Big Ten meet, he wasn't even throwing shot. He only threw the disc at the outdoor Big Ten meet his freshman year, and so like confidence at that point was a challenge, and Matt Conley did an awesome job of kind of rebuilding that and building him back up. And he ended up making both Big Ten finals his second year in uniform. PR'd at the indoor Big Ten meet, almost PR'd at the outdoor Big Ten meet, placed 7th for the first time, scoring points his outdoor sophomore year. And so I took that into consideration too, like his big meet history, how he had performed, what the emphasis was, because he didn't even throw the shot for the last half of his second year. And so kind of all those things went into consideration when I kind of took over the men's program. And I used John as a way to kind of get buy-in from the whole men's group. If you guys went to Nate Ott's discussion, a ton of what Nate said about building faith, building trust, building confidence. You can have the worst program in the world, but if you get buy-in, which I used John to kind of help get buy-in. And so the pent testing we do in November was huge for us. And then we did an inter-squad meet in early November or late October, and John threw well there. And so through him, I got the group to kind of buy in, and it kept working because he ended up having a great year. And then on top of that, he was the only returning shot putter and the only guy in the group who had scored in the Big Ten in any event. And so he was a huge piece of trying to get that team going. This is his discus PR. You can see it's a good wind. I think his season best was 5170 going into this. He threw 55 meters like 3 times, between 55 and 5508 at Drake. Ended up, I think, second there. It was really cold. Had been raining, but the wind was pretty nice. So, and then he ended up 6th in the Big Ten, throwing 54 low at the Big Ten meet, also in rain. So him throwing far in rain was a huge step too, because he was not confident all the time in his technique. So John's evolution, I talked a little bit about this already. Pretty consistent growth in the discus. He didn't have a ton of technique coming in, and so just kind of getting throws in was huge. How each year was set up. He learned to rotate his freshman year. Discus was secondary. He redshirted. He went to the US under-20 meet. I think he threw almost 19 meters with a 6K, threw 1730 with the 16. In year 2, shot began as the primary because of that, but ended the season as a discus only because of kind of what he went through. Year 3, shot went back to being the primary. He had a bunch of success early in the season, but still kind of went through some confidence issues, had a 15-meter meet at Michigan, but then kind of started to build it back up, made the Big Ten final, both indoors and out, was 13th at the region meet throwing 18.49, I think, and so had a great year. And then I took over in August, and so my plan with him was like to ask a ton of questions and try to get him to be super athletic again, and let him kind of guide his training, build his confidence, work on 1 or 2 small things. And then we started, next you'll see his indoor PR and then his outdoor PR. By the time he started throwing far, then he started to let me kind of put some of my vision into his technique. And so his progression, he went from 18.54 in year 3 and 52.28 to 19.93 last year. Was second at the Big Ten meet and 55.08 in the disc. Last year he opened up at 17.89. This year he opened up at 18.88. I don't know what that means, other than he is more stable in his technique. I don't think he's going to throw 20.93, but his testing stuff is pretty ridiculous, so I wouldn't put it past him either. So how I set John's training up long-term, I didn't really have long-term. I only had 2 years, hopefully more. I think he's at a level where if he wants to keep going, we can maybe consider that. But he does shot 4 days a week. He does basically 1 full discus practice between 2 days. He does 30 minutes twice a week, once before, once after the shot. The discus stuff is 70% full throws because we're only taking 60 throws total and very minimal drill work. If we do drills, it's mostly with a weighted ball or with some other implement. Coach Conley had spent a ton of time with John's technique, and so his technique was pretty stable by the time I got him, but hadn't gotten to the point where he did a bunch of like special strength stuff. So we've done a ton of heavy med ball, dumbbell throwing, different types of presses, overhead stuff, to try and kind of build up his pressing strength even more. That's one thing, if you study triphasic, you don't do like overhead stuff, you don't do some of that stuff in the weight room, so we've had to kind of find ways to do that. And then the other thing, John was a wide receiver. Like what made him good in high school was being super athletic, and so he runs a lot more now. He jumps. They play basketball for warm up some days. Like I let him be an athlete and do that. And I wanted his confidence to be built back up through some of those activities, and then develop feel. John's super explosive, but tight and kind of rigid and jerky in his technique, and so we've spent a lot of time with a lighter med ball doing smooth, easy throwing stuff to feel out and kind of smooth out his technique. So this was his indoor PR last year, 1950, at a home meet. He ended up indoors, I think, throwing 18.89 or something at the Big Ten meet to be 3rd. But this was his PR at the time. So you can see some pieces in there that are kind of jerky and unconventional, but you catch the ball back and you got a 40-inch vertical and a 500-pound bench press, and you're excited, you can throw far. So he did that there. Short term, like this is what his weeks look like in the fall. Monday was full throws. He ended up having to throw in the morning on Monday because of class. So we would start with some med ball drill work to kind of get his body woken up. And then he would do the shot put full throws, usually 2 balls, like his heavy and middle ball. In the fall, we went all the way up to like full throws with a 10K, and then like an 18, and then a 16, something like that. Then the next program I think was 20, 18, 16, and now he's on 19, 17, 15. Tuesday, we would lift heavy on Monday, so then Tuesday would be shot put drill work, and then a heavy discus day, so maybe a 3K discus session and then some 3K weighted ball. Wednesday would be a light lift and some very minimal specific strength just to kind of get him freshened up a little bit. Thursday, shot put full throw day, 3 different weights. We would do like 7-ish full throws with each ball with 6 to 9 drills before that to kind of warm up and get ready for it, and almost always heavy to light. Friday was discus first, which I didn't love, but because of class schedule, that's kind of how we had to do it. So that would be a more full throw, dynamic day, and then we would go right to his middle shot put instead of the heavy stuff because he was already warmed up. He'd already used some of his nervous system, and then we'd end with some light throws. We started reversing maybe right before Thanksgiving, and so the light throws even were done non-reverse. And then Saturday, John hits the weight super hard. He's super strong, and so he gets buried more than other people. So we would do a longer warm-up for him, and then just a lot of opposite direction work. We do full med ball throws left-handed. We do weighted ball stuff in the discus left-handed, just to help him recover, feel some things out, but not he would not throw far and he'd get irritated if we had a full throw day that day or something like that. And then we do a short circuit to kind of speed up recovery, help him feel better on Monday, because he does have to come back Monday morning at 7:45 and try and take full throws. So then this is John's outdoor PR. You can see a totally different entry here between what he did indoors, what he did outdoors. I like this better, less movement, more simple. He had a great day that day. He threw 1950, 1975, 1993. Again, ended up 2 weeks later, 13th at the region meet, but threw almost 19 meters to be 13th. So a good day, but irritating to be 13th 2 years in a row with all the progress he made. But also good because it definitely motivated John to be more successful this year. So the last athlete I'm going to talk about here is Naoka Clunas. So Naoka is a Jamaican young woman that I work with. She was a junior college transfer. She was a multi-eventer in high school and picked up the hammer at the junior college level. And so her background, 2015 high school grad, 2016-17 at Cloud County Community College. She won a national title in the discus at Cloud, super athletic. Those are her PRs coming in. Very low hammer and weight training age. She did 4 events at Cloud. She threw the jab too, so like the amount of time she spent on each event was minimal. And then overall as a thrower, a pretty low training age. She did the HEP. She didn't really start throwing until like 6th form or whatever, so class 1. So here's things I considered Naoka's body type. When she came to me, she was, I would say, malnourished. She is not 168 pounds anymore. And so like how we handled the fall was unique because we were trying to put a ton of weight on her. Her background in high school, she had some traumatic incidents with family stuff, and so trust is a huge problem for her, or a huge thing that you have to work towards. And so at Cloud, she was not coachable, which is not the coach's their fault. That is Naoka's fault, and we've worked a ton on that. But she did have success because she worked super hard. Combined events background, tough home life. Her mother was killed when she was young, and so was homeless for a couple years. Just a very unique story, very, very tragic, but has worked hard. Will graduate with 2 degrees in May, so extremely proud of her. One thing we considered, she was a national champion in the discus at the junior college level, but there's also like 10 really good discus throwers from Jamaica, and so and no good hammer throwers, and so we kind of took that into consideration. And then what our team needs were, when she came in, we were trying to win the Big Ten championship in 2018, and so we needed her to be ready in 3 events to help us, and so we kind of kept doing that. And then I needed her to compete well right away, so we didn't do a bunch of technical changes right away. This is not her shot PR, but she opened at 17:05 this year already, and that was that throw, and pretty impressive for December, especially considering how we set up her training. So year 1 is Cloud, year 2 is Cloud, year 3 she transferred to Minnesota. We tried 4 heel turning in the fall. That didn't work. She didn't want a toe turn. She thought she was a 4-heeler. It took a long time to get her to buy in, almost January, I think, before she let me toe turn her. She 3-heeled the weight. We worked on changing the shot entry and then just gaining a ton of strength and a ton of like changing her body. And then I needed to learn about her. I needed to learn her background and gain her trust. And so I spent a lot of that year doing that. You can see her progression, pretty consistent progression in the shot. The discus progressed through year 3, and then last year we did almost none of it. The hammer progressed through year 3, and then last year she redshirted, and so her competition opportunities were pretty minimal. But last year we moved to almost solely focusing on the hammer because I felt like internationally that's her chance. She made a Jamaican team in 2018, and so got some exposure there for the first time, and she has the nervous system to throw the hammer really far and some feel for it. So, and now year 5, hammer and weight is still the main focus, but trying to grow as a competitor, take pressure off herself in the shot, and then keep the discus in, because I do think she can score points, but make that just a fun event. We throw that 1 day a week. She takes like 20 throws. It's totally a fun, no pressure, enjoy competing event. So, and then she opened at 21:07 in the weight off 4 turns too, which was a good place to start. Not a PR, but a good place to start. First time ever competing off 4 turns. So this is long-term training, hammer emphasis all the time, minimal discus emphasis. We were good in the disc when she got here. We're not as good now. She is important to us in the discus, but if she's having fun with it, it goes a lot better than if she thinks she needs to throw it far. So develop special and just general strength for her, trying to get volume through general strength. Lots of press varieties, lots of wind and release stuff. And then technical changes, I waited, like I said, till January to kind of get her to trust me, get her to believe in what we were doing. And then we made a lot of technical changes since then in all the events. And then really with her, if she delivers the implement correctly, if she doesn't try to rip out of it, she will throw it far because she is fast. And with the women's stuff, if you're fast, you have a huge advantage. So this is her 4-turn weight throw from 2 weeks ago as well. So not perfect, not on the left enough, but the ball went 21.07 looking like that. So I'm pretty excited for what she can do as we go. And we will probably 3-turn her when we get to the Big Ten meet to be a little bit more aggressive and a little bit more consistent. So weekly training, she throws more than anybody, but she had an internship in the fall, she has an internship in the spring, she had no classes left this year, and so like her schedule allows us to do that. So full movements in the hammer on Monday, followed by a short shot workout. When we do shot with her, the South African drill is like the most important thing. If she feels that, she's gonna throw far. So every shot session on Monday was a full throw of some kind, a south, then another full throw. We do like 6 to 8 sets of that, and then kick her out. And she usually threw by herself, so we could get through that pretty fast. Tuesday, again, was coming off a hard lift, so drills. She did some discus stuff, but again, it was at most 30 throws, kind of for fun, just to like stay in touch with it in case she can catch one at the conference meet. Wednesday, light lift, some special strength, and then with her, more general strength just to kind of get volume, prepare her for volume the rest of the season because she's going to compete in 3 events a lot. Thursday, shot put full throw day, 3 different weights, mostly non-reverse, and then a high intensity plyometric day. Friday was hammer full movements, a bunch of rotational strength and our heaviest lift. And then Saturday was hammer drills. We threw a little bit of weight all year with her, and then some heavy med ball work in the shop too. And then again, general strength volume for her. Her workouts on Saturdays were more than everybody else's. This is her hammer PR from the same meet that Agnes PR. This is 64.26. Pretty smooth. Head's a little fast, and not a lot of direction, but that was 64.26. So that's kind of examples. And then I just wanted to end, I got 11 minutes left here, just kind of talking about when I'm looking at special strength, when I'm looking at conditioning, when I'm looking at athletic development, technique, implement selection, like what do I think about and what I think the most important things to think about as you set up those programs. Because again, you guys what you have available for special strength, what you have available for facilities is going to be different. And so, but what you want to consider, I think these are the important things to consider. And so with special strength, when, I always think last, but that might not work for everybody. How much, I think depends on the kid, depends on the training age, depends on the academic load they're in, because sometimes their technique's going to degrade really fast, but you need to build volume to enable them to take more throws the next time. And so how much you're doing, do you want to do the event you just practiced, or if they're a multi-event kid, a lot of the time on a shot put day, we'll go do hammer special strength just to save their wrist, and vice versa. On a hammer day, we'll do shot put special strength just to kind of like stay in touch with the other events. If they do have 2 days off between events or whatever, kind of keep it lined up that way. And so how you want to set that up, I think that's where taking notes, figuring out what works for kids, figuring out, oh, I did shot put presses with a med ball and I came back the next day at a shot put practice and it was really good, so I'm going to keep doing that. Or it was really bad, so I'm going to go back to hammer special strength or whatever. And then the opposite side, how important is that? How much? When do I do that? I've found some coaches I talk to do almost all their special strength on the opposite side. Some coaches do none on the opposite side. I've gone to even throwing a fair amount on the opposite side with kids. As you saw on Saturday, John did a full session of opposite side stuff. I do think there's a balance component, a neural component to that of like kind of having to feel and think things. But I do think opposite side strength for balance, all that kind of stuff. So doing plate twist both ways, doing med ball releases both ways, doing shot put strikes with your left arm, that kind of stuff I think is important. But I do, in special strength, it's 66% dominant side, 33% non-dominant side. So if I'm doing a shot put strike, it's 10 on the right, 5 on the left, that kind of breakdown. Or plate twists are even, winds are even, but when it's a release thing, it's 2 to 1. So, and then conditioning, athletic development, again, when does that come in? Are you going to follow a neural day and a recovery day type plan? Obviously, if you're doing plyos, you're doing conditioning, that kind of stuff. Depends on how you set it up, what your rest periods are, where that's going to fall. I think a big thing to consider is how many throws do they need to be prepared for. Naoka, like I said, is going to throw 3 events at almost every meet outdoors. And so some days that's going to be 18 competitive throws, 3 warm-ups, cool downs, being at the track a long time. And so like, how do you set her up to be able to, her 18th competitive throw, to still have energy and focus and all that kind of stuff. I think conditioning is a huge part of that. Plus I think being the 4K, the 1K, you got to be fast and athletic to throw those. And I get almost exclusively like 3 sport athletes who are undertrained in the throws. And so what made them successful in high school was being a better athlete than everybody else. And so I try to kind of keep that stuff in their program. We run, we jump, we do that kind of stuff. So can you combine quality and quantity? Probably not, but you might be able to figure out ways to set up a circuit that has some heavy plate twists to get some quality stuff, but then has a sprint and has some other stuff in it to kind of set up to kill more than one bird. Body type, I think, is something to consider. I had Caitlin Long was 6'2", 300 pounds. Naoka was 5'9", 175 pounds or 185 pounds at the time, whatever. Their plyos, their sprints, all that kind of stuff was very different because Caitlin would pull her hamstring if she did what Naoka did, but they both threw really far, both made the national meet. Injury history, you got to account for ACL history, that kind of stuff if you're doing single leg jumping, sprinting, and then obviously what the weight room considerations are too, what they're doing in there. That's something I've had to take into account a ton. And then general strength circuits, I think, are something that we don't utilize enough probably as throws coaches, but are huge for recovery and huge just for getting volume. Like, it's simple movements. I've stolen them from other coaches, but just doing core work, that kind of stuff to increase their ability to handle volume, I think is important. Implement selection, heavy versus light, what range you use, what are you doing in the weight room that cycle, what are you doing on the track that cycle, so how do you match that kind of stuff up. How much variety do you want? As a young thrower, I usually keep it at 2. John has been up to 5 shots in his program. With the weight, Naoka has up to 7 implements in a program, never on 7 in a day, but throughout a week she'll touch 7 different implements in the weight and the hammer. And so, like, how much variety can they be successful with, and how much do you want to give them to make them learn too? So what's the focus that time of year? What type of athlete? Again, Caitlin, Agnes, Naoka all made the national meet in the weight the same year. Agnes was 6'1" with a 31-inch vertical. Caitlin was 6'2", 300 pounds, and Naoka was 5'9" and super fast. And so how they trained, what implements they threw was very different. So are they a weight thrower versus a hammer thrower? Do you have short, heavy stuff? Can you find a light shot that emulates the disc? All that kind of stuff. So, and then what do they throw well? Confidence, I think, is a huge part of that. I had a girl, Temi Ogunrinde, who's still training in the hammer, and I knew the 5K for her was the most important ball. So we didn't touch the 5K until April last year, and we sucked in March. We were terrible, and it was a challenge. But I knew as soon as she got the 5K in her hand, for whatever reason, that would start to go far. The 4K started to go far. And so when you bring that stuff in, if you have notes, if you notice that kind of stuff, like when you time that up, I think is super important to consider, at least. And then technical thoughts, like how do events correlate? How do they break apart? You know, I think rotational shot disc, I think Jerry Clayton talked about this one time, like the difference in technique between the rotational shot and disc is this, like the implements here versus the implements here. You can keep the technique relatively similar and still be successful by, like, kind of combining those events. And then the circle's obviously a little bigger, so left leg mechanics might be a little bit different. Hammer and shot disc kind of relate with how the right side turns, what the connection to the right side, connection to the ground, and then the foot position, having a dorsiflex foot, I think is important on landing in both events, and so how you coach those. And then the hammer shot disc problems, the knee width, arm separation, that kind of stuff. That's why, for me, I've found on a hammer disc thrower, I don't have them throw those events back to back. They may throw them on the same day, but I'm gonna separate them by a couple hours because the knee stuff and the limb length, that kind of stuff gets confused for the kids I've coached. So, so as far as technical thoughts and implement selection, those are the things I consider. Final thoughts, I think trying different stuff, talking to other coaches, see what they do, taking notes here, I think is super important. Figure out what works for your athlete and then stick with it. You know, I've talked to other coaches who have 3 different weight programs that they run their freshman year, and they take notes of how kids progress in those, and based on which one they progress the most, that's what they do the rest of their career. Like, have different ideas, different ways to approach things to find success. I think there's no substitute for throwing. I think you got to find ways to get the implement in their hand and out of their hand. But you need to know the athlete and their limitations. You got to know when their technique degrades, what they're capable of, what implements they need to be throwing. So each athlete is unique. You're going to screw it up. I've screwed up many kids. If you look at Agnes's progression, you look at Naoka's progression, it's not this perfect linear thing. Now that's on them too, but for me, I take a lot of blame, especially if more than one kid has a bad cycle. That's probably my fault. If it's one kid, it might be an academic thing, it might be a life thing, it might be their fault. But if there's 2 or 3 kids that aren't responding to something, that's definitely on us as a coach to kind of figure out. And then be patient. You got hopefully 4 years, maybe 5 years, maybe 2 years if it's a junior college kid. Be patient, but also keep challenging them in different ways and try to figure it out. So that is the end of my talk about how I approach multi-event throwers. Is there any questions? All right, well, thank you guys. Appreciate you listening.